When you meet someone that is new and someone is different from you, approach the situation with curiosity. Instead of taking well, they're just different, or I don't understand this, seek to understand them by being curious and asking questions.
What about coaching for women do you feel like will create the biggest change?
In order for you to create an outcome and an impact and sustainable growth, you've got to understand how to change organizations, how to change organizational culture, how to build a dynamic team.
Wow, so many good nuggets. Welcome to What's Possible, a show for high performers who want to take their leadership, well-being, and overall life satisfaction to the next level. I'm Ilene Schaefer, and today we are talking about coaching for women of color. Has your organization embraced and implemented a DEI program? Have you had success with recruiting leaders of color, but a challenge with retention? Over the years, there has been a significant increase in DEI efforts, and yet many of those efforts are failing. Lower pay, regular experiences of microaggressions, imposter syndrome, caring for extended family, all these things take a toll on well-being and on career growth for women of color. If you are finding your leaders of color are leaving, this episode is for you. It might be time to consider how dedicated coaching can offer the support needed and help reverse this trend. With this in mind, I have brought in my friend, Dr. Venessa Perry. Venessa will help us answer these two questions. What changes when women of color have an executive coach? And two, how does an organization benefit when they support women of color through coaching? I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Perry, a transformational consultant at the forefront of DEI for more than 25 years. She's a mentor, SVC executive coach, author, and positive psychology practitioner. Over the last several decades, Dr. Perry has witnessed the DEI trends. She's been brought in to consult organizations on their efforts, has coached senior leaders around DEI, and has shared her expertise on how we can best address the inequities that persist. She is also a mentor to many entering the field of DEI. When I asked Venessa to join the show, I said I wanted a topic that will truly make a difference around this ever-challenging issue of how to best support women of color. Her answer? Coaching for these leaders. So here we are. Let's dive on in. Welcome, Venessa. Great to have you on What's Possible.
Thanks so much, Ilene. I'm happy to be here.
I always love getting Venessa time, so thank you. So before we dive in, I always ask a super basic question just to define some of the things that we'll talk about. So when we say coaching for women of color, give us just an overall definition so people who are tuning in, they know exactly what we're talking about.
Sure. When we're talking about women of color, we are talking about Black women. So that's women who are African descent. We're also talking about Latino women. So that's women who are Hispanic or have a Spanish background. Those individuals could also be Black as well. We're talking about the Asian Pacific Islanders and also Indigenous people as well, Indigenous women of color.
It's hard when we throw these terms around. It's like, okay, let's get clear on what we're talking about so that we can actually make a difference too. I think if we don't know who we're talking about and what we're talking about, it's really hard to create change.
Right.
So you have been in the DEI space long before most of the people who we constantly see out there talking about making changes. And I'm just curious, because you started 25 plus years ago, which of course it doesn't look like you could have been doing this work 25 years ago, but I know you have. So what brought you into working in this space?
So I initially started off in healthcare, and I started off as a nurse. Initially, I was a nurse in the military, went on to graduate school of public health. And it was really when I was in graduate school. Well, let me take a step back. I worked in a number of hospitals when I was in the military, when I was going right before I went into graduate school. And so it was my intention to go to medical school, like many people at that particular time. And what I saw was there were just so many people in my community, in the Black community, who were just struggling with a variety of health conditions. So chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension. And so I started to kind of ask myself, what could I do? And so I got into public health and left the clinical side of medicine and got into the public health side. And so for me, it was really about looking at the health disparities, is what we called it at that particular time, which now they call health inequities, and trying to understand what was happening not only in the Black community, but also in communities of color, just in general. And so from healthcare, literally, I went from clinical medicine to being more on the prevention side of medicine and on the education and training side of medicine and just public health. And subsequently, kind of went on from there into the programmatic aspects and advising nonprofits on how they could target their communities of color, how they could have the greatest impact, whether or not that meant how to help them with fundraising, how to research programs, how to develop and evaluate programs, and things like that. And so subsequently, it was like a ripple effect for DEI. So, to your point, this has changed a great deal. So we used to talk about racial equity, and then all of a sudden, people wanted to start talking about diversity and cultural competence. And so from there, my work just kind of went along, and I found myself in this field that I call racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, because that's really what the big thing is. Although many other people just want to say it's DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I think it's really important to understand that this field started because there was a disparity in racial makeups in companies and also in the gender disparities in makeups of companies. So that's really how I kind of got here. And so, like I said, obviously, in the last 4 years, things have exploded with George Floyd and just the thrust of people wanting to be in DEI work, which has kind of put me to this place in time where I am now.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that I so admire about you, because you have been in the space for so long. You've seen changes, you've seen setbacks, you've, I'm sure, been frustrated, exhausted, and thrown your hands up many times. And yet every day you still hit restart. And not only that, what I so admire in you is you're ushering in the next generation too, of people who are rolling up their sleeves and wanting to make this world a more equitable place. And you and I talked real briefly right before. I said, should we be switching the I in the DEI to the B with belonging? I had just read a recent article yesterday, I think, actually, in the New York Times about really moving from inclusion to belonging, and just thinking about what we're experiencing. And it's 2 steps forward and 4 steps back often. And for you to not only be doing the work, but ushering in this next generation and wanting to really be there as a support system, it's admirable. It's not easy work. And I know it takes a toll. I'm constantly impressed by you. And I just want to say that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And as if our listeners didn't notice, our colleagues are always teasing Venessa. We're like, how many lives have you had? I mean, wait, you were a nurse, you were public health, and everything you do with just the utmost of, dedication, care, and development expertise. So 1 in a million.
Thank you.
I will say that. Yes, absolutely. So thinking about your longevity in this space, and as you're working with our future leaders in this space of whether it's DEI, or actually now I'm going to put the R in front of it. So racial equity and inclusion, racial equity and belonging, all of that. What do you see as the biggest thing that's on the horizon right now? What's next?
I think the big thing for DEI, or for racial equity, diversity, and inclusion is looking at how it's changing. So we've already seen the change. I kind of predicted that we would see the change. The things would go back to status quo pre George Floyd, and so we're seeing that with the recession. We're seeing a lot of jobs that are cut in DEI initially. Particularly, we're also seeing a lot of those individuals who are working in those DEI roles are people of color. So those jobs are getting cut. And then we're also seeing, instead of seeing kind of the doubling down on DEI, I think what we're seeing is a backing up it definitely in some places and less of a commitment than there had been before. So there is this whole thrust around putting DEI under sustainability, which it is in many ways. The unfortunate part of that is we don't really want it to get lost if we put it there. So they're putting it under ESG, sustainability in government. And so that means it's going to be really critical for people to understand not only sustainability, which is the next kind of big field that they're going to be hiring people in, but also for people to understand organizational development. And that's really my area of expertise and background. I come from that background as a psychologist and as an OD. I'm an organizational psychologist, understanding, how do you go into organizations and change their culture? How do you do change management? And that's really what DEI is. And so right before I got on this call, I happened to have a mentoring call with a woman that said, young woman said, I want to jump into DEI. I've been following you for a while and you have time to talk to me. And I told her that very thing. And I said, she said, if there's one thing I need to learn, what is it? As it relates to DEI, I said, you need to understand change management. You need to understand change management. You need to understand organizational development, because this is long-term work. In order for you to create an outcome and an impact and sustainable growth, you've got to understand how to change organizations, how to change organizational culture, how to build a dynamic team. And that's OD work 101.
I saw that on your LinkedIn. I saw you've talked about it quite a bit on your LinkedIn recently about the importance of OD and having that. And it really does make sense. It's change management at its best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about this and thinking about the future, what's next, I know as I opened, a big thing on your mind is coaching for women of color. And I'm curious, what about coaching for women do you feel like will create the biggest change?
So my research interests are around women of color, specifically Black women, and their experiences in the workplace with what we call gendered racism, which is actually just racism and sexism, the intersectionality between the two. And so one of the things I think we realize in the workplace is that Black women often don't have the opportunities that other women do. And even to be completely honest, they have less opportunity than other women of color. And so one of the ways in which we can assist them with gaining, more experience, knowledge, expertise, and just share overall in the workplace is by coaching. When you coach Black women, you give them the opportunity to show who they are, to work with them on their imposter syndrome, because the other challenge behind this is Black women are actually the most educated group of people on the planet. So, and the interesting thing about, we have multiple degrees, and you know that just
Yes.
from my experience alone. And so oftentimes Black women come into the workforce and they feel like they have to do twice as much just to be just as good. And a lot of that has to do with their education. So they already come into the workplace and they're very qualified, usually overqualified. And so how do you help them? How do you help them transition into the workforce? How do you help them feel comfortable in the workplace? And it's really about coaching them, because they come into a workplace and oftentimes they're, dealing with disrespect. They're dealing with microaggressions. They're dealing with sexism. They're dealing with racism. And so over time, that really can just wear them down. It really beats them down. And so oftentimes they become very defeated. And so the goal really is to empower them. And so I do some things in my coaching that probably a lot of people don't do. And it's really about a lot of the inner work. Society has told Black women that they are not enough, that they are undervalued. And so a lot of the work I do is mindset work with them and really shifting their perspective on who they are and what they want out of this world. Because ultimately, if I'm able to help you transform your mind, then everything else will follow. The manifestations of your mind will follow. And so it's really about doing that deep work with them, asking them the hard questions about, who are you? And that's actually like one of my favorite questions that I ask people. that I coach, and they're like, "What do you mean? Who am I?" And I'm like, "Who are you?" And then they start telling me their title, and I'm like, "That's not who you are." Right. And so it's all of those type of things. It's working with them. It's asking them the hard questions and giving them that work, that deep work, so they can think about, what do I want my life to look like? What are the things that make me happy? How can I find my inner child? Because oftentimes, particularly for Black women, when we go into the workplace, maybe we're the first in our family to get to a corporate setting, or we're the first that's college educated, or we're the first that's making a lot of money, right? That ultimately can change the wealth gap for our family. And so it becomes very difficult. So you're not just dealing with the workplace and the people, but you're also recognizing that I got another family to feed, not just my own family, but often my extended family, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, my aunts, my uncles, and maybe in some instances, my parents. And so there's a lot riding on me. There's a lot of pressure there for Black women. And so those are a lot of the things that we talk about and that I coach them through. How do you set boundaries, right? Not only in the workplace, but at home, because 9 times out of 10, and this is whether you're Black, white, green, the problems that you're having at home are going to show up in the workplace. And so it's really about, how do you balance what's happening at home with what's going on in the workplace, and how can you create the necessary structure so that you can be as productive as possible in the workplace, and so that you can be valued and seen of value in the workplace and get to that next level, because that's really what it's about. And so coaching really helps Black women navigate those spaces and places that they would not normally be able to go, because they don't get the mentorship, they don't get the sponsorship. And it's really helping them understand, how do I have those conversations with those executives? How do I get into those rooms? How do I network? What do I need to do to get into a certain program so that I can meet these decision makers? Because the other thing is that majority of Black women end up getting stuck at the middle management level. And so all of the studies have shown that. So this is really helping to navigate those internal challenges and struggles that they have by giving them a coaching that they need, by helping them network, helping them navigate the structures that are in place and get in front of those decision makers while still balancing everything they have going on at home.
Yeah, it's a lot. And that's one of the things that I always talk about with coaching. I always pause when people say, are you a life coach or an executive coach? And
Right.
We say we're executive coaches. However, it's the same human that shows up in life and in home. I so love that you incorporate that in, because when you do think of these women who you are coaching, they are coming with so much responsibility outside of work, and to be able to help process that and have support there as well as in the work environment is really significant.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we don't have the liberty to be able to just focus on one thing. We often have to focus on multiple things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear you saying the mindset, which is so significant. And one of the questions that I had that I was thinking about for you is, you have people who have this ability to get to work with you. You do this phenomenal coaching and they gain a different strength, perspective, capabilities, etc. And then they go back into an environment that hasn't shifted. And I was curious how you work with clients to navigate that when you walk out my office and you feel super strong, but yet you're going into an environment that possibly hasn't changed. What are some thoughts that you have?
So it's funny that you said that, because 9 times out of 10, the environment isn't going to change, but it's how they react to the environment. So you can't control other people. The only thing that you can control is yourself. And so these are the things that I focus with them on. I focus on how do you react to certain things. So I can't even tell you just the number of situations and scenarios that my coaching clients bring to me about what's happening in the workplace. And they say, I haven't addressed this yet because I needed to wait until I had coaching. So you could tell me how to address this. And so, so most of the time it's diplomatic, but some people are like, okay, I just want to go off all the way off. And I'm like, no, you don't want to do that. Here's how here's how you can address the situation. And so it's really about them regulating themselves in a lot of ways. So, I'm big on this emotional regulation thing right now. And then also understanding, two things that I'm also mastering myself. And one is that the only person you can control is yourself. You can't control anybody else. What you can control is how you react to that situation. And then the other piece of that is not being wed to the outcome. So managing your expectations. So detaching yourself from the outcome. So it may not happen the way you want it to. And if it doesn't, that's okay because you now detached yourself from the outcome. But if it comes out the way you want or even better, then that's great. But what I don't want you to be is disappointed. So managing the expectations as well.
Wow, so many good nuggets. I just want to highlight some. So that managing the expectations and letting go of the outcome, shifting the mindset, controlling what you have control over there, and emotion regulation. I mean, things for, of course, all of us to take away. And I can see where this is so critical in the work that you're doing. Particularly, one thing that really kind of struck me when we were talking, or when you were talking a moment ago about imposter syndrome. And then we're also talking about an environment where there might be comments or where there isn't a promotion that's been earned and deserved, or whatever that looks like. The environment almost feeds the imposter syndrome on top of it. A lot of times we'll think of imposter syndrome as something it's something that I'm internalizing, but the environment is saying something quite different. So as coaches, when we're working with someone in that space, we talk about, okay, what's real, what's happening that we know to be true, and how do we talk back to our thoughts? However, what I'm hearing in the case of some of the women who you're coaching, there might be some real situations that are feeding that imposter syndrome that are external.
Sure, absolutely. There's a lot of situations. So, like I said, you're talking about an individual, Black women who happen to be highly educated, and yet and still, they don't get the promotion that they're deserved, or the person that's supervising them doesn't even have the number of the amount of degrees or credentials that they have. We have to come into the workplace and we have to have a certain face on, right? So, we have to be calm and not be the angry Black woman and not be the excited or passionate Black women. And so there are these stereotypes, these biases that we all come with biases, but often impact Black women in the workplace. And so it's really about how do you deal with these things when you know that you're worthy and you are very qualified, perhaps overqualified for some of the promotions or the sponsorship opportunities or the mentorship opportunities. And this is where, really coaching comes into play. And it's really about helping you navigate those things. How do you get in front of certain people, decision makers? How do you develop the relationships? Because often we just don't. People hire people that look like them. People promote people that look like them. And so you want to get into that mix. And so the only way that you can get into that usually is through some type of mentorship or sponsorship, but it's really about the networking. How do you network? One of the things I talk about a lot is, who are you following on LinkedIn? Like, are you commenting? LinkedIn has just exploded over the last 10 years, as you know. And so, if you're not following certain people that are in your industry, if you're not networking, not only outside of your industry, but inside of your own company, then that's going to be a challenge because people are following you. People are listening. People are watching. To your point, I post on LinkedIn. You could not have told me 8 months ago when I started posting just my random thoughts that I would have 10,000 followers. Let it would just explode. And I would just be like, people are listening to me? I'm like, oh my God.
They are listening to you, they are following you, and they are learning from you.
Yes.
Absolutely. So when you think about all this that you're talking about, and I hear about the issues that people are coming to you with, the things that you are coaching around, and it's as I open the show, it's high stress. It takes a toll. It takes a toll not only on someone's career, but on their well-being and overall health. And I know we both come from the positive psychology background, and I'm curious how you weave some of the tools in to also support the well-being of these women of color.
Yeah, so this is actually something that I've been working on for a while, but I'm really honing in on because there's a lot of research out there right now just about the well-being of Black people just in general. And so one of the ways that I really focus on it is, I'm telling people all the time, like, hey, are you exercising? Let's do meditation in our sessions. Let's do some breath work, in our sessions. How do you emotionally regulate yourself? How do you thoughts stop? This whole, counting backward from five, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique that a lot of people talk about, this gets you out of your head, calms the anxiety down, and gets you refocused on what's important in that moment. So you're not stressed out. So you're not, prone to anxiety. And we know that, because of the challenges in the workplace, Black women, their well-being is in jeopardy. Oftentimes they're suffering not only from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, but also it impacts their health, and their physical health, and they start having, heart conditions, palpitations, dealing with obesity and, heart issues, hypertension. So there's a lot of things that are happening. The stress is already high, and it becomes even more high as they deal with workplace issues. And so what I do is I try to give them tools. I try to give them tricks. I'm big on journaling. So oftentimes I give them lots of journaling prompts and things like that. Write this letter to yourself. What's something that your inner child used to love to do? Rediscover that, because these are the things that are really important. And it's so critical for Black women and just Black people in general, because oftentimes we didn't have the opportunity to be as free as others, to be able to just be children and to just kind of grow up. Sometimes we had to be the head of the family. And like I said early on, when you get a big job, there's an expectation around you have this big job now. So, you've got to help the family. And sometimes that means you're helping not only your own family, and you might have your own husband, or a wife or, a spouse and children, but you've got to help mama and daddy and, brother and sister and grandmama. So there's all of those things.
Yeah, I know I sent you over a text when I was in the middle of reading Burnout. They talk quite a bit about this as well in their book. And one of the big concepts that they talk about is human caregiver syndrome. And when I hear you saying all of this, that's what we're talking about. You've got people who are trying to take care of everybody. And then, of course, taking care of yourself gets to the bottom of the pile, which we can't have that happen, because if your pitcher's not full, you can't water everybody else's garden. So it's a lot. And I think it's such a gift to be able to work with someone like yourself, where you're keeping an eye on that for them. Because I think when all of our resources are depleted, it's hard to keep ourselves top of mind.
Very much so. And we also deal with a bunch of trauma as well, like I said, in the workplace and society. And so when you come into the workplace, when they come to me, they're usually like, okay, like I'm at my wit's end. Like, how can you help me navigate these things? And so, the other piece I also say is, hey, you know what? If they start bringing things up, you know what? I need you to get in therapy to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
because all these things, it's a conundrum of things, right? And so how do you deal with all of these things that all of these stresses, you're dealing with happening at work, what's happening at home, out in society every single day. We're dealing with racial trauma.
Without question. And it's 365 days a year, 24/7. So there's no break from it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you were to just kind of give us a one line of, if for our partners who are listening from organizations who have women of color who they do want to make sure they are able to retain and promote and value the talents and what they bring to the table, what would you say is the first thing they could do in terms of connecting them with coaching?
I think this is really where inclusion and belonging comes into play. So, lots of corporations have employee resource groups, and they have affinity groups for the various marginalized populations. So that's critical. So making sure that you have some type of support structure that's within the organization. If you don't have a support structure that's within the organization, make sure that that you're giving them have a decent professional development budget so that they actually can get coaching. Because this is the other thing that I find a lot of times. I can't even tell you how many people I've spoken to recently who need coaching, but they don't have the professional development budget. And so, people don't understand that executive coaching is not free, or just even coaching in general, and it's quite expensive. And so making sure that that's a really good benefit for them and allowing them to choose their own coach. Because what I often hear is the coaches that they're being offered don't meet their needs, because oftentimes they don't have a person of color, they don't have a Black woman, they don't have a woman of color for them. And so therefore they don't necessarily feel comfortable in working with the individuals that they're offered. So making sure that if you work with a Better Up or some other coaching company, that company has a cadre of seasoned professionals, women of color, men of color, to be able to work with them specifically to address their needs. And if they don't, then making sure that they have the opportunity to go outside to choose their own coach using their own professional development budget.
Yeah, it is interesting looking through different coaching sites to see. Particularly, I always love, and of course we're a coaching organization, so I always find it fun to see who's out there and are they showing their coaches. And I think that's really important for us. It's really important that you can see who our coaches are. You can see their bios and start to connect and request a certain coach if that's someone who you feel like you'd like to at least have an introductory conversation with, because match is everything. I always say with coaching, you can have phenomenal coaches out there, but if it's not the right match, whether it's personality, whether it's cultural, whatever it is, you need to feel like this is the person who's my it person, who is the right fit for me.
Absolutely. It's so critical to have the right match for coaching. And so a lot of times that access isn't there, or that opportunity isn't there.
One last question on this, and then we're going to have to wrap up, but we'll certainly do a part 2. What would you say is possible when an organization does start to get coaching for some of their, I'm going to say, their top leaders of color? In the ideal world, it would be all leaders, of course, are getting coaching, but at least even if they can only provide it for some of their valued leaders, what do you feel is possible once those leaders get coaching?
Oh, I mean, anything is possible. I mean, I think you're able to see an individual who is performing at the highest level, who is comfortable in who they are, who is able to show up, authentically, who is able to navigate the workplace in a way that's high functioning, a person who's able to really show you their skills and talents and why you should value them. So if you pour into them, they'll give back to you.
All right. So I have a couple follow-up questions for you. One is, in the spirit of well-being, what's one thing you do every single morning without fail to set yourself onto the right path?
Pray. Every morning. Pray. Yep. My devotion time.
Wow. Praying. Beautiful. And what would you say is your most favorite book that you've recently read?
I've read this really good book. It's by Alex L. She's a Black author, and it's called How We Heal. Almost like it's a practical book because it's got meditation exercises, it's got stories of various women of color in it, and it also has journal prompts in it. And it's just a really good book to take you on like a healing journey.
Excellent. Oh, I'm going to need to look that up. So, How We Heal.
By Alex L.
Wonderful. All right. So, as a tradition, we always leave our guests with 3 gifts. So, what is one big takeaway that you hope that they gained today?
That people understand to invest in women of color, that women of color are facing, the double jeopardy of being Black and a woman. And so to the extent that you can provide them with support, whether it's coaching or mentorship or sponsorship, that's ultimately not only going to benefit the organization, but also benefit the person as well.
Mindset. I know you talked about working with your clients on mindset shifts. What's one mindset shift that you hope our listeners leave with?
That they should be in a growth mindset, that they should recognize that even though that there are individuals out there who are different from them, from a humanity perspective, we're all the same. And so when we have a growth mindset, we're able to see those differences. We're able to at least be empathetic and compassionate with those differences, even if that's not our experience.
Growth mindset. And we're more similar than we are different, but we need to also see the difference.
Absolutely.
And last one, I always have good conversations, but I don't want our listeners to leave without some action that they can take today that's easy, plug and play. What's that one action?
The one action I would say is when you meet someone that is new and someone is different from you, approach the situation with curiosity. Ask questions. Instead of taking well, they're just different, or I don't understand this, seek to understand them by being curious and asking questions. So approaching the situation with curiosity.
Yeah. Oh, curiosity always for the win. I love that.
Absolutely.
Venessa, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Thank you to everyone at home or on the go for listening. If you find this show meaningful, please hit that follow or subscribe button. It helps more people find what's possible organically. If you have questions about anything we've talked about, please drop me a line at podcast@svchange.com. I read every email, and whether it's an episode idea, a guest recommendation, or just a simple note to let me know how the show impacted you, I'd love to hear from you. I'm Ilene Schaefer, and I'll see you on the next episode.